nurse Christina Riggs, convicted of smothering her two young children to death in 1997.
I normally reached out and told somebody what I was feeling or thinking.
November 4th, 1997, Sherwood, Arkansas. A quiet suburban street where nothing ever seems out of place. Inside one of those homes, the lights are still on long after most families have gone to bed. Christina Riggs moves from room to room in silence, pausing every few seconds as if she's trying to talk herself out of something, or talk herself into it. Down the hallway, her two children are asleep in their beds, unaware of the weight pressing down on their mother. Christina is a nurse, trained, steady-handed, the kind of person people trust when life feels fragile. But tonight, she's pacing, clutching supplies she brought home from her hospital shift. And whatever she is preparing to do, she's already convinced herself there's no turning back. It's a night that begins like any other, in a house that looked like any other. But by morning, nothing in this family, this neighborhood, or this state will ever feel normal again. Because what happens inside this home doesn't start with hatred. It doesn't start with money, jealousy, or rage. It starts with a mother unraveling under the weight of a life she no longer believes she can carry, and the choices she makes before sunrise. We'll take this story all the way to the Cummins Unit Execution Chamber, making Christina Riggs the first woman executed in Arkansas in more than 150 years. Stay with me. This is the Christina Riggs story, told chronologically, factually, and exactly as it happened. Christina Marie Riggs was born on September 2, 1971, in Lawton, Oklahoma. Far from the headlines her name would one day dominate. She grew up in Oklahoma City, the kind of place where families know each other by name, and children play outside until the streetlights come on. But behind the walls of her home, Christina's childhood was nothing like the calm streets around her. By her own account, Christina said she was sexually assaulted when she was young, an experience that left marks no one could see, but shaped nearly everything that came after. By 14, she was already numbing herself with cigarettes, alcohol, and marijuana. It wasn't rebellion. It was escape. At 16, still a child herself, she became pregnant. She gave that baby up for adoption, another emotional wound she never fully confronted. After high school, she tried to build something stable. She trained as a licensed practical nurse, an LPN. And for a while, it looked like she was finding her place. Nursing gave her a purpose, a paycheck, and a sense that she was finally moving forward. But there was another layer most people didn't know. Christina worked in Oklahoma during the aftermath of the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing, caring for patients near the disaster zone. She saw injured bodies, grieving families, and the kind of suffering that stays with a person long after they clock out. Her defense team later pointed to that period as a major psychological turning point, one that deepened her depression and left her emotionally raw. By the mid-1990s, Christina was carrying years of trauma, assault, early pregnancy, heartbreak, exhaustion, and the emotional weight of her job. These weren't things she talked about out loud. Instead, they built quietly inside her, layer by layer, forming a pressure she never learned how to release. She appeared functional on the outside. But inside, Christina Riggs was already breaking. By the early 1990s, Christina Riggs was trying to rebuild her life. She was working as a nurse, supporting herself, and for the first time in years, she had a sense of direction. In 1991, she became pregnant again, this time with a little boy she would name Justin Dalton Thomas. The child's father wasn't involved, but Christina entered motherhood determined to do things right. When Justin was born in June 1992, she poured everything she had into him. He became the center of her world. Not long after Justin's birth, Christina met John Riggs, a young sailor stationed with the Navy. John was steady, responsible, and offered the sense of stability Christina felt she'd been missing. They married in 1993, hoping to build the kind of family neither of them truly had growing up. The following year, in December 1994, their daughter, Shelby Alexis Riggs, was born. For a moment, life looked almost peaceful. 2 young children, a new marriage, a fresh start. In 1995, the family moved to Sherwood, Arkansas, to be closer to Christina's mother. It was a practical decision, but also an emotional one. Christina wanted support. She wanted help. She wanted to feel less alone. She found work at Baptist Hospital, the kind of steady, respectable job that could have kept the family on solid ground. But behind the picture-perfect exterior, cracks were forming. Christina's emotional struggles didn't disappear with marriage. Depression lingered. Stress piled up. And the demands of parenting, especially while juggling nursing shifts, left her exhausted. The breaking point came when she accused John of striking Justin hard enough to require medical attention. That incident shattered the marriage. Christina filed for divorce. John left. And suddenly, she was a single mother with 2 young children, a stressful job, mounting emotional pressure, and almost no one who understood how deeply she was struggling. From the outside, it looked like she was holding things together, but inside, the weight was slowly crushing her. By late 1997, Christina Riggs was living 2 different lives. On the surface, she was a quiet single mother working long shifts as a nurse. She showed up on time, handled her duties, and blended into the routine of the hospital. But privately, Christina had slipped into a deep, consuming depression. She felt overwhelmed, cornered, and convinced that the life she had built was falling apart faster than she could hold it together. Instead of reaching out for help, Christina began making decisions that would take her down a path she could never return from. She started gathering medications, slowly, quietly, and deliberately. She filled a prescription for amitriptyline, a powerful antidepressant that causes heavy sedation when taken in large amounts. From the hospital, she began stealing morphine and potassium chloride, medications she handled regularly during her nursing duties. Potassium chloride is a drug she knew well. Nurses are trained to dilute it and administer it carefully because, undiluted, it attacks the heart almost instantly. Each drug she took had a purpose. She wasn't acting impulsively. She was preparing. Christina also began writing notes, letters addressed to her family, explaining her intentions. They weren't angry letters. They were soft, apologetic, and final. She described feeling trapped, exhausted, and unable to carry on. She spoke about wanting peace, about wanting her children to never feel abandoned or left behind. Her reasoning was deeply flawed, but in her mind, the path she was choosing made sense. By then, she had convinced herself there were only 2 doors left: take her life and leave her children behind, or take them with her so none of them would have to continue without the others. She chose the second door, believing it was the merciful option. She researched how much medication it would take. She rehearsed the steps in her head. She gathered the supplies she needed. And she built a plan based on her medical knowledge. Sedate the children, inject them, then end her own life. It was methodical, calculated, and in her mind, inevitable. Christina didn't snap. She planned. And that plan would unfold on a quiet night in November 1997. On the night of November 4th, 1997, Christina Riggs put her plan into motion. The house was quiet, the kind of quiet that settles in only after children drift off to sleep. Justin, 5 years old, was in his small bedroom surrounded by the familiar comfort of toys and blankets. Christina entered carrying a bottle of amitriptyline, the sedative she had carefully collected. She gave both Justin and Shelby doses meant to make them drowsy. Within minutes, their movements slowed, their words trailed off, and the house became still again. But this wasn't simply an attempt to help her children sleep. It was the first step in a series of actions she had rehearsed in her mind for weeks. Christina prepared a syringe filled with undiluted potassium chloride, a drug she knew from her nursing experience was dangerous when used incorrectly. She believed it would stop Justin's heart quickly and quietly, but the reality was far different from what she imagined. Undiluted potassium chloride is harsh. Instead of a peaceful passing, Justin reacted in visible distress. Christina hadn't anticipated what the drug would actually do when given this way. And now, faced with the consequences of her own actions, panic took over. Trying to fix what was already going wrong, she reached for a second syringe filled with morphine. Her goal was simple: ease her son's discomfort, calm him, make him sleep. But that, too, didn't work the way she expected. Her medical training could not undo what she had already set in motion. At this point, Christina was overwhelmed by fear and desperation. Her plan was collapsing in front of her, and she made a devastating decision. She took a pillow and held it over Justin until he stopped moving. In that moment, her plan shifted from calculated steps to emotional survival. She believed she had gone too far to turn back. When it was over, the room was quiet again. But nothing in Christina's world would ever return to normal. She had crossed a line she could never undo, and the path ahead was darker than anything she had imagined when she first began planning that night. Justin's death was the moment everything changed, and instead of stopping, Christina kept going. After Justin's death, the house fell into an eerie stillness. Christina stood in the hallway, shaken, breathing hard, trying to steady herself. Nothing about what had just happened matched the scenario she had imagined during the weeks she spent planning. She had expected a quiet passing. Instead, she witnessed fear, pain, and chaos. It rattled her to her core. But Christina believed she had crossed a point of no return. In her mind, there was no reversing what she had already done. And now, she turned toward the small bedroom where her 2-year-old daughter, Shelby, was lying half asleep under a pink blanket. Shelby was still drowsy from the amitriptyline Christina had given her earlier. She wasn't fully awake, nor fully aware of what was happening around her. Christina watched her for a moment, long enough for the reality of the night to sink in. Shelby was innocent, peaceful, untouched by the chaos that had unfolded in the other bedroom, and that made what came next even more devastating. Christina had originally planned the same process for Shelby: sedation, followed by an injection. But after witnessing Justin's suffering, she couldn't bring herself to use the potassium chloride again. She placed the syringes aside, knowing she would never be able to face what she had just seen a second time. Instead, she chose a different method, one she believed would be quicker, quieter, and free from the pain she had witnessed. Christina leaned over the bed, reached for a pillow, and gently pressed it over her daughter. Shelby, half asleep, didn't fully understand what was happening. Within moments, the room went still. When it was over, Christina lifted her daughter and carried her into the master bedroom. She placed her next to Justin, arranging them side by side as if they were simply sleeping. She pulled a blanket up to their shoulders, smoothing it out carefully, tenderly, the way a mother tucks her children in at night. But the calmness of the scene didn't match the reality. It was a quiet tableau created after an irreversible act. 2 small bodies lying close together, surrounded by the silence Christina had mistaken for peace. She sat there for a moment, staring at them, trying to convince herself she had done what she believed was best. The truth, however, was already settling over the room. Nothing about this night had gone the way she imagined, and nothing could ever undo what she had done. 19 hours after Christina collapsed, her mother grew worried. She hadn't been able to reach Christina. No calls, no answers. Something didn't feel right. She drove to the house in Sherwood, walked up to the front door, and stepped inside, expecting maybe a sick daughter, maybe a messy house, maybe nothing at all. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. She found Christina on the bedroom floor, barely conscious, her breathing shallow, her skin pale. The suicide note lay nearby. For a moment, her mother believed she had arrived just in time to save her daughter. But when she looked toward the bed, the truth hit her in a way no parent should ever experience. Justin and Shelby lay side by side under a blanket, still, peaceful, and gone. The scene didn't make sense at first. A grandmother seeing her grandchildren that way, covered neatly, placed together, untouched by chaos. It was a surreal shock that took seconds to truly absorb. But once the reality settled, everything inside the house changed. Emergency responders arrived. Paramedics rushed Christina out on a stretcher. She was unconscious but alive. The children were pronounced dead at the scene. Detectives began documenting the room, the notes, the medications, the syringes, the entire chain of events Christina had planned so carefully. Christina regained consciousness shortly after being transported to the hospital. She didn't fight. She didn't deny what happened. She didn't offer excuses. The weight of everything she had done was already on her. On November 6, 1997, just 2 days after the bodies were found, Christina Marie Riggs was formally arrested and charged with 2 counts of capital murder. The community was stunned. A mother, a nurse, someone trusted to preserve life, now accused of taking the lives of her own children. The story of what happened inside that Sherwood home was no longer a secret. It was now a criminal case, a media headline, and the beginning of a legal battle that would lead all the way to the execution chamber. By the summer of 1998, the Christina Riggs case had already shaken Arkansas. The details were heartbreaking. The confession was clear. And now, the question wasn't what happened. It was why. Christina entered the courtroom in June 1998 and pleaded not guilty by reason of insanity. Her attorneys painted a portrait of a deeply troubled woman. Years of depression, emotional collapse, unresolved trauma from childhood, and psychological damage from working near the Oklahoma City bombing victims. They argued she wasn't thinking clearly, that she believed killing herself and her children was an act of escape, not malice. But the prosecution had a very different story. They told the jury that Christina Riggs didn't snap. She planned. She gathered medications. She calculated doses. She wrote goodbye letters. They claimed her motives were rooted in frustration, resentment, and a belief that her children were burdens she no longer wanted to carry. In their version, Christina didn't act out of mental collapse. She acted deliberately. The trial moved quickly. The facts were overwhelming. The jury deliberated, and Christina Riggs was found guilty of 2 counts of capital murder. But what happened next stunned even seasoned attorneys. During the sentencing phase, the moment her defense team should have fought for her life, Christina refused to let them speak. She wouldn't allow character witnesses. She wouldn't allow mental health experts. She wouldn't allow any mitigating evidence. She told the court clearly and calmly that she wanted the death penalty. She didn't beg. She didn't protest. She simply stated that she believed execution was the only appropriate sentence. It was one of the rare moments in American courtrooms when the defendant wasn't fighting the state. She was agreeing with it. And the jury listened. Christina Marie Riggs was sentenced to death. After sentencing, Christina was transported to the McPherson unit, home to Arkansas's women's death row. Upon arrival, she became something she never imagined in her darkest moments, the youngest woman on death row in modern United States history. Most inmates facing a death sentence begin a long legal process. Appeals, petitions, reviews, all aimed at delaying or overturning execution. Christina did the opposite. She told her attorneys she didn't want help. She waived her appeals. She rejected petitions. She insisted that no additional filings be submitted on her behalf. When her lawyers tried to raise issues about her mental health or the circumstances surrounding her life, she fought them, arguing that she had made her decision and wanted the sentence carried out. In legal terms, she became what is known as a volunteer for execution, an inmate who actively pushes for the state to carry out the death penalty rather than delay it. Inside the McPherson unit, Christina remained quiet, cooperative, and resigned. She wasn't angry. She wasn't combative. She didn't issue long statements or seek attention. She simply waited, day after day, month after month. Her case moved through the system faster than almost any death row case in the country, without appeals, without legal battles, without roadblocks. While other inmates fought to prolong their lives, Christina Riggs prepared to surrender hers, and the state of Arkansas prepared to grant her wish. By the spring of 2000, Christina Riggs had spent nearly 3 years on death row, waiting, reflecting, and refusing every effort her lawyers made to save her life. She wasn't fighting the state. She wasn't appealing. She wasn't reconsidering. She believed she deserved the punishment she had asked for back in that courtroom. On April 30th, 2000, 2 days before her execution, Christina was transported from the McPherson unit to the Cummins unit, home to Arkansas's execution chamber. She was flown under heavy security, calm, composed, and resigned. Inmates often spend years, even decades, fighting the moment she was now approaching voluntarily. But Christina accepted it as the final chapter she had written for herself the night she took her children's lives. Inside Cummins, she followed the same routine nearly every death row inmate goes through: final medical checks, last-minute legal confirmations, and paperwork, acknowledging her understanding of the process. She signed everything without hesitation. Christina was offered the opportunity to seek clemency, a final appeal to the governor that could delay or halt her execution. She declined. She told officials she would not ask for mercy. Over her last meals, she spoke quietly with staff. No dramatic behavior, no outbursts, no last-minute pleas. In her final hours, Christina wrote letters to members of her family, expressing sorrow, regret, and the crushing weight of what she had done. To some, she apologized for her actions. To others, she spoke about her children in a way that suggested she never stopped loving them, even as her decisions destroyed everything. Those final 48 hours were quiet. No legal battles, no media fight, no hesitation. Christina walked steadily toward the one outcome she had insisted on from the very beginning. On the night of May 2, 2000, guards escorted Christina Riggs into the execution chamber at Cummins. It was 9:28 p.m. when she was secured to the gurney, her arms outstretched, her breathing steady. Officials read the routine statements. Witnesses watched from behind the glass. Christina kept her composure, but the process did not begin smoothly. For 15 minutes, the medical team struggled to find a suitable vein. It is one of the complications that can occur during lethal injections, especially when a history of medication or physical stress affects circulation. Christina remained patient, almost detached, as they attempted different insertion points. Finally, the IV was placed. When asked if she had any final words, Christina delivered a calm, prepared statement. "No words can express just how sorry I am for taking the lives of my babies. No way I can make up for or take away the pain I have caused everyone who knew and loved them." Moments later, as the chemicals began to flow, she added softly, "I love you, my babies." The lethal injection sequence included potassium chloride, the same chemical she had attempted to use on her son Justin. In the end, the drug she once handled as a nurse and later used in her crime became the substance that ended her own life. At 9:28 p.m., Christina Marie Riggs was pronounced dead. She became the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845, and only the fifth woman executed in the United States since the death penalty was reinstated in 1976. Her story closed the same way it began, quietly, tragically, and with a sense of sorrow that lingered long after the witnesses left the room. In the days following Christina Riggs's execution, Arkansas was left grappling with a case that never fit neatly into a single explanation. The crimes were horrifying. The planning was deliberate. Yet the psychological unraveling behind it was undeniable. And because of that, the debate surrounding Christina did not end with her death. It only grew louder. Mental health advocates pointed to her long history of depression, the trauma she carried from childhood, and the emotional toll of working near victims of the Oklahoma City bombing. They argued Christina was a deeply unstable woman who never received the kind of support or treatment she needed. Prosecutors, on the other hand, maintained the position they held from the beginning, that Christina made conscious, calculated choices and followed them through with clarity, not confusion. Her case also reignited a national conversation about volunteer executions. Most death row inmates spend decades fighting for appeals, but Christina did the opposite. She waived her hearings, rejected mitigation, declined clemency, and insisted the state carry out her sentence. Some believed it was accountability. Others believed it was suicide through the legal system. There was also another layer, one that made the case even more controversial. Cases involving mothers who kill their children almost always attract intense public reaction. Society struggles to reconcile the idea that a caregiver, a protector, could become the source of harm. Christina's case was no exception. For many, it became one of the darkest intersections of motherhood, mental illness, and capital punishment in modern American history. Legally, her name remains notable. Christina Riggs became the youngest woman executed in the United States during the modern death penalty era, and the first woman executed in Arkansas since 1845. Her execution marked a rare moment in U.S. capital punishment history, both for the gender of the defendant and the speed with which she was put to death. But beyond the headlines and legal milestones, there is a more painful reality at the center of her story: the lives of Justin and Shelby, two young children who never had a chance to grow up, two families forever marked by grief, two futures taken away long before the execution chamber opened its doors. And so, the legacy of Christina Riggs is not simply about crime or punishment. It is about the fragile line between emotional collapse and irreversible decisions. It is about a system struggling to understand mental illness. And it is about a night in Sherwood, Arkansas, that continues to haunt everyone who studies, remembers, or lived through this case.